Hello and welcome to News Club with your host B, and I'm here today joined by Mercedes and Tom Chivers. Say hello, guys.
Hello.
Hello.
And today we are going to talk about global financial catastrophe. But don't worry, we're going to make it simple, fun, and also, give you an escape hatch that you can jump out of and kick all the other passengers behind you in the bits on the way out. And we're going to talk about Hillsborough. But let's get into it. Let's talk about global tariffs and everything like that. First and foremost, though, give us a rebel yell.
Nobody knew people didn't know what the rebel yell sounds like because it's sort of lost to history, right?
Really?
Yeah, it's one of those things. There were only like written accounts of Union soldiers being like, "Oh, it sort of sounded like a yell mixed with a holler mix," and it's like, okay, well, what did that actually sound like? So it's a thing lost to history. There you go, fact of the day for you. No one actually, other than Billy Idol, no one knows what the rebel yell sounds like.
You've lost me. You've lost me.
Yeah, rebel yell was something that the Confederate soldiers used to.
It was their battle cry.
The bad guys.
Bad guys.
It was the bad guys' battle cry. Okay, yeah. So, alrighty then, let's dive into the whirlwind of economic chaos that's been brewing lately. We're talking about the global tariff crisis and the looming financial crash. This is stuff, by the way, that I've written for myself because, like, trying to get your head around this is a bit of a nightmare. But I've done a lot of research. I am an economics graduate. I promise you this is actually good stuff and it will actually help you out understand what's going on here. Now, obviously the news is changing day by day, but there are some broader things that are happening that are going to affect us probably and some ways of trying to understand it. So we're going to talk you through this in 6 easy points and we're going to focus on the big picture, how it affects you and what you can do about it. Buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride. Okay, so first and foremost, the big story is there going to be a recession? Hopefully, most listeners have lived through a recession. I say hopefully, sadly, we will have lived through a recession. Certainly after the economic crash of 2008, that led to, decade or more of austerity. But a recession really does mean that we'll be earning less, being able to spend less, and we're going to go through some tough times. So recession hits everyone. And that's important because in some regards, stock markets can tumble, but it not affect us. Actually, just a few weeks ago, Nvidia stock crashed because of the release of DeepSeek, the Chinese AI program, and didn't affect anyone. But it was the single biggest market value loss in recorded US history, right? But it didn't affect anyone. No one would have noticed that. And to be honest, with economic crashes in the stock market, they do tend to take time before we feel them. The financial crisis of 2017, actually, it took a long time before we really felt it really badly because of the austerity programs of the 2010s. So there can sometimes even be an 18-month, 2-year lag. In this case, I think it's going to be a lot quicker, sadly. But these are things worth noting. So recession odds, the recent moves, let's talk about what's been going on. The recent moves by President Trump slapping hefty tariffs on imports have sent shockwaves to the economy. JP Morgan has upped the ante, estimating there being a 60% chance of US recession. And, the US makes up something like 25% of the world's economy. So it will affect everyone else. And JP Morgan has said 60%. Goldman Sachs isn't far behind, raising their recession odds to 45%. The big fear is stagflation. So that's a stagnant economy and massive inflation as prices go up, but no one has any money, which is really, really bad news, right? Like imagine everything getting more expensive in the supermarket and you're getting paid less than you are now. Like that's what we're talking about. So, I've talked about like when DeepSeek came onto the market, Nvidia stock plummeted nearly 17%, which is the largest single day loss in US history, but it didn't really affect us. But over the past week, there's been really significant falls in shares. And then there was a little flattening out. Everyone thought, well, maybe this is it. Maybe we'll work it all out. And this is what the investors did. And then it started to tumble further. And that's because Trump announced 104% tariffs on China. Oil prices, by the way, have gone down to below $60 a barrel. And that's interesting for two reasons. One, because the Russian economy, which is obviously at war, needs the prices to be above $60 a barrel, ideally above $80 a barrel to sustain itself. So within Russia, there could be a massive economic collapse, which is going to really impoverish ordinary people in a devastating way. But also it means that basically what people in the market are saying, people who trade and make bets on how the economy is going to go, they're saying, we think people aren't going to be producing things, so they're not going to need oil. They're not, because oil runs everything, and they're saying it's not going to be worth very much because no one's going to need it, because we're not going to make anything, because no one's going to be selling anything to anyone. So that's huge. That's, again, not unprecedented, but it's big news. So what could be the reasons for this? Trump's economic strategy, some people have been talking about it, and there is a sort of new right that actually has an economic theory that's behind this. And basically their plan is like a three-legged stool. You impose these tariffs to protect domestic industries, and the tariffs are taxes. Basically put on import taxes and say this stuff has to cost more, and that's going to give us more tax money, and it's going to make getting in stuff from outside more expensive, so we'll produce stuff within US, right? Then at the same time, they give massive tax cuts. So they give ordinary people more money in their pocket by cutting their taxes. And all of this, because of the stock market crash, devalues the dollar, makes the dollar worth less. So it makes the stuff that you're now making in the US actually cheaper to sell abroad. That's supposedly potentially the plan. At the moment, we haven't seen any tax cuts. We haven't seen any strategy to like build things. But the goal is to boost domestic manufacturing without stoking inflation. That's the stated goal. Or the potential goal is, and we can come to this later, is to sink the market and then just all the oligarchs buy up everything at cheap, and then they own the whole American economy. And they might be doing what happened to Russia in the 90s, which is Putin came along, got his buddies, bought everything cheap and said, now you guys all own the Russian economy and we're going to run this together like a gang. And maybe that's what Trump's doing, because the reality is, if you look at the challenges of reshoring, i.e. bringing manufacturing back to the US, they can't build stuff like China can. It would take years to build, and huge investments in technology to build factories the size of China's. China's have factories the size of cities. They have advanced robotics and technology. They have also, China has healthcare, education and workers' protections that the Americans don't have, as well as infrastructure like roads and trains and public transport, which means that it's not just more expensive because American workers cost more. It's more expensive because if you hire people in America, you have to invest in local municipal public transport. You have to pay for their healthcare. You have to pay for things that the American government will not cover. So it's really expensive, really difficult. I don't think anyone's going to do it. So I'm just going to pause there before I talk about anything else, and just bring in you, Chivers, on this and say, what are your takeaways just from like those elements there? Like we're talking like a potential recession, the stock market is tumbling, but everyone says, well, some people say Trump has a plan, this three-legged plan. It looks like it's going to be difficult to achieve. What's your assessment?
Yeah, I mean, as a sort of mortal man without knowledge of how all these intricate systems of global finance and economics really work, what stood out to me in a lot of this is the way people are talking about what kinds of jobs would emerge from this if Trump's plan works. And a lot of it seems to be, mostly right-wing people or sort of pro-Trump people saying, this is going to be a new renaissance of high-paid, skilled, fulfilling factory jobs, producing American goods in American factories, American jobs for American workers. And it strikes me as a real dissonance with a lot of the economic reality, not just in terms of like, okay, well, you've built your entire economy on shipping cheap, badly paid, poor conditioned labor overseas for years to build up the kind of economic prosperity and comfort of your life in America. But now, like you were saying about the expansion of Chinese manufacturing and factories, where so much of it is really high tech, really automated, there are the actual capacity for human roles within factories is getting smaller and smaller by the day because of automation. There's a real element here of like, even if Trump's plan comes through on a 5 to 10 year basis, it is not going to be something that's going to be a huge renaissance of employment for the average American worker. It's going to be a huge sort of, not to use it sort of blandly, but like it's going to be a lot of soulless capital, because it's just going to be factories that are producing stuff with no human intervention whatsoever. Lots of people are still going to be unemployed, and there are going to be lots of people still in unfulfilling, low-skilled, low-paying jobs, even after this Trump utopian process of tariffs and reshoring, if it pays off at all. So it's funny to see that even on the terms of this will all go brilliantly because it will bring jobs back to America and people start building stuff here again, it's like, unless you're actively de-skilling and not using technology in these new factories, it's not going to create the number of jobs that people think. And there's a similar thing here in the UK with, I mean, I know we'll probably come on to like nationalising steel in a bit, but like this idea of, well, actually the UK's response to these tariffs should be to nationalise certain key industries. But like those key industries are not going to immediately create loads of jobs. They're going to create very high-tech factories that produce goods while leaving many people still out of work. So there's these real kind of conundrums and sort of contradictions in a lot of this stuff, which I don't claim to understand. But my sense is like, what does this mean for people's jobs and livelihoods? In a fantasy, it would mean everybody works in a factory and has a lovely job and makes lots of money. In reality, the kind of jobs and factories that are being brought back are not involving human workers that much anymore.
And that would be brilliant because that will bring us to my fifth point, which is about economic nationalism. But first and foremost, Mercedes, what, if anything, do you make of all of this? Like, because it is kind of hard.
I was in Spoons and I found out. Yeah.
Cool. Highbrow economic insight here.
No, that's where a lot of people, you know, if you go into a Spoons, there's Sky News on in the corner and people will glance over it and go, oh, Trump's done something or Starmer's saying something soon. That's the way a lot of people get sort of the ambient background noise of news is from the TV in the corner of a Wetherspoons.
That with the British people as a British person doing British things. That's the closest I've honestly been to being British in a long time.
No, and I respect it. What I'm saying, like, that's actually the genius of Trump's communication style. So, for instance, you know, he's been coming out with this, you know, he slapped 104% tariffs on China, right? Like, because China said, we will not back down.
And I remember the 104. I remember the screen. I remember everything. That's going to jump
And
out
what
at you.
Trump has said is, oh, you know, you don't play cards when you're only holding a pair of twos. Right? Like, he's very good at creating an analogy that everyone can understand. Like, I don't understand what 104% tariffs are. Oh, but China's got a weak hand in poker? Yeah, okay, right. But, like, what have you got from all of this? Because I think a lot of the news anchors are struggling to explain what's going on, but they like the drama.
Oh my god, no, because they said nothing in the span of like 5 minutes. Like I looked back on the screen and I was like, why is the conversation still here? I feel like the same guy, bald
They've
guy.
got to fill 24 hours of news, and there's one number in the day, that big China tariff number, and they've got to fill 24 hours talking about it.
Yeah, it's like nothing else happening in this
No,
country at all.
literally. I guess like on what Tom was saying, I don't know. My brain kind of goes to like good jobs, the kind of jobs that we want to be doing. It makes me think about the fact that we should be working less anyways and being paid better. It doesn't really make me think necessarily like, how do we deal with this situation in particular? It's more like, how would I rather live?
Nice.
What's the society I would rather live in than this?
Well, brilliantly, that's something that we'll cover in part 2 then, because I think that's exactly the kind of topic we want to talk about when we talk about blue steel, right? Like essentially Labour copying the Tory approach to steel, but what else could we do? And so, yes, you know, steel sounds boring. We're going to make it fun. And I would have to agree with you. It's probably the only person on the panel that has worked in factories for a good deal of my life. It's not fun. You
No.
know, there's been entire books written about how like not fun it is. You know, one of them was called On the Conditions of the Working Class by Engels. You know, it's notoriously not fun. Karl Marx came up with a theory of alienation based on how unpleasant it is to work in a factory, which is when you're alienated from your labor. And that means like I'm doing something where I'm just a cog in a machine. I'm doing one process repeatedly. Like I would just used to put something on a moving line repeatedly. Like that was my job. Or when I worked in Amazon, I would just fill up shelves. That's all I would do. You never get to see the beginning and end of it. You're not an artisanal person who makes a table from scratch. Do you know what I mean? So you're divorced from the thing that you're doing. So how can you have the love for it? And we've managed to create somewhat a mixed economy where there's an economist called this sort of the third industrial revolution, where we've kind of gone into a post industrial revolution in Western economies where we get to make artisanal stuff. We get to have our Etsy store. You know, we get to make things that we fully own and we have some love for them. And that brings us back to a place where we're being a bit more human because let's remember, you work, most of your life is working. So you want to be doing something you love. I'm not entirely sure who wants to be putting a bolt on a car for 8 to 10 hours a day with 30 minutes of break over the total day, all day, 6 days a week. Like, I don't know who wants to do that. I don't know why that's the American dream. But I think what has been noticed by like Yanis Varoufakis and Politics Joe is they said what Trump is doing here is he's speaking to something that the left speak to, which is the disappearance and the destruction of the working class. And whilst he's associating it with essentially bringing back crap jobs, and we're going to talk about whether he can bring them back, but probably not through this. I think for us, we want to strengthen the working class in terms of giving ourselves good jobs and less work and more joy and something more beautiful than like, great, hey guys, everyone, you can get to go back to being essentially wage slaves in horrible working conditions, making something that you don't never really see. Yeah, it doesn't seem to be hugely appealing. As the voice of Gen Z must said, is this a kind of job that you'd like?
Nope. As someone who's never worked at a factory and has no experience of this shit, no. I guess it really depends where you're coming from, right? Like, it's not a Gen Z thing necessarily. I really think it's at that point, like, how you treat your relationship with work. And I think for a long time, I've always made a distinction, not always, but for a while, I've made a distinction between play and work. And the fact that, like, we exist in this, like, coercive relationship with the thing that keeps us alive, because we're not able to enter it fully as like someone who wants to do this thing 100%. We have to do it because, I need to eat, I need to put bread on the table, I need to pay the bills. So it's never going to be this thing that I idolize. It'll never be this thing that I love fully through and through. And I don't think it's meant to be, but it is meant to be better than like something that's going to like take my soul and crush it and put it through a plastering machine and then burn it and then disintegrate. You know what I mean? That's how I don't know anything about how a factory works. But yeah, no, I think it should at the very least be something that is balanced, where I'm able to like it just enough, but also not enough to then feel like I'm destroying something I absolutely love. So whenever I think about art, it can never be something I monetize and then like rely on as something that is the sustenance for my life. I also don't want the sustenance of my life to be something that is soul crushing completely. And I think, yeah, it's why I speak to this idea of working less as well, because it's like if I'm able to work less and still live well, if I'm able to pursue that 4-day work week, that 3-day work week, if I could be so ambitious and still live and live well, then I have the rest of the week just do whatever the fuck I want, and that's amazing. And I think that's where our aspirations should be. And I think I would like to position myself in a way in such that that is made more viable and possible for everyone around me.
Okay, beautiful. Well, let me finish up on some economic stuff here. Let me be a titan of the world, unlike Tom Chivers, who understands nothing, like Jon Snow. Game of Thrones reference there. That's right. Cool guy. 10 years after the
I'm thinking of
fact.
the Channel 4 presenter Jon Snow, who knows lots of stuff.
There's a repeated refrain in Game of Thrones.
I've seen Game of Thrones. Don't treat me like some troglodyte of culture.
Wait, catch me up. I forgot. I've not watched it in years. Like you said, you're 10 years
Flipping
behind.
heck. Yeah, like there's a sort of budding romance where like a northerner goes to Jon Snow. You know nothing, Jon Snow. I'm not going to do a northern accent because it sounds like I'm taking the mick, and I'm not. I'm just bad at accents. So yeah, you know nothing, Tom Chivers, because some broader strategists are saying that this is the rise of economic nationalism. And certainly this is going to break the global trading system. Whether there's a global trading system that now goes around the US and maybe goes around the US and China, with the EU, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, China, South Korea, Vietnam, all sort of somehow making some sort of pact. That may happen. It may very well not happen. But some people are saying, like, look, the right know that climate change is occurring. And actually, all it is about now is securing resources and hunkering down. Get Greenland, invade Canada, take control of Mexico, and tell the rest of the world to sod off. And, if you're thinking about like life as if it's a game of Risk, and you've just got a world map in front of you, which I know, there's a lot of geeks on the left who love to play Civilization and they're thinking of it like that, then it makes total sense. But in the real world, I don't think that's how it works. I don't know. Tom Chivers, do you play Civilization? Do you like...
I do. I saw you just called me a cultural troglodyte for apparently not knowing Game of Thrones, and you're referencing Risk, a board game I don't think I've ever seen anyone play except in a web browser.
What? Well, yeah, no one plays it on the board because the dice rolling takes forever. You have to play it in the web browser.
That was the fun of it.
He just read you. Accept it.
Okay, fine. Anyways, troglodyte. So you like Civilization. I mean, does this make more sense? Is Trump either like a sort of master of destiny trying to push us towards this world where we all become more self-sufficient bioregions in a collapsing ecology? Or is he, the weather vane and that's just the way the wind's blowing? Or is it something else entirely?
I'm going to preempt The Left Need to Be Cooler segment by quoting from Marxist geographer David Harvey. There is no spatial fix to the crises of capital. What he means is you can't just plonk more stuff down in your own territory to solve the fact that seeking endless growth and endless profit is like a loser's game, a mug's game. There is an element in sort of Trump's strategy of it's probably not an explicit or even implicit recognition of climate change, but it is a recognition of dwindling resources and dwindling slices of the pie going around for everybody. And there's a sense of like, Trump's thing all his life has been tariffs. And he basically, the impression you get from the last sort of week is finally, or, what has come to the surface of Trump's mad rants is like, he believes that exchange for like between willing trade partners is theft. I give you money for steel. I get steel, but now I don't have my money. You've stolen my money. What's going on? He's like how babies lack object permanence until they learn it. Like you take something away from them and it disappears out of existence. Trump doesn't have object permanence for like global trade. He sort of thinks that like, oh, if you give someone money and you get a good in return, you've lost money and not get anything back for it. And his whole reshoring or onshoring, his approach to that is like, yeah, in the broader sense of climate change, is like we've got to create our own stuff. We've got to just literally almost in sort of video game terms, I've got to create all of these new resource nodes on the American map that I can continuously exploit for my own good. And as long as I keep tapping the upgrade button on the, typing in the cheat that says give me more money while also smashing update on American resource. I don't know. It seems like so much of it is built on hypotheticals and sort of really elementary ideas of how economies function. But whether it's like tied directly to climate change, I don't know. I think it's just that sense of they view politics and economics in very zero-sum game kind of terms, right?
Yeah, and one of the things that's being said and suggested is like having sort of global tariffs, like just everyone gets screwed, right, is for Trump a way of, instead of him having to meet groups of people, which he just doesn't like, and he doesn't like groups of leaders, he's not into multilateralism, is to force single leaders to come to him on their knees begging for things, and then he can get stuff. He might just be doing that just to make himself feel good. It might make America stronger. It probably won't. It probably just line his pockets, but maybe that's really all of the motivation here, and we're all just going to have to be buffeted by this balm cakes. I mean, in fact, to call him balmy is actually a disservice to people who are a little bit odd. He's like a malignant narcissist, right? Like he's a he's a real scrote, and we're all going to have to deal with that. We've got to try and make sense of it, and that's what we're going to do in the next segment. But these are some of the things that we've got to be aware of. Now, to lead into this, in America, there's this idea that you reshore like key industries, and we're going to talk about that in relation to the UK. In the US, the government doesn't invest in stuff in the US largely. It sort of has in Elon Musk's Tesla, but it doesn't usually do that, or it does in the space program. There's a couple of key areas, I guess, in the military, but it doesn't tend to in, say, automotive car industries like China has and things like that. And so the only way that if they were to reshore stuff, they could get those factories built is if like rich people had money to do that. And he's just wiped out all their wealth on the stock market. Like they've lost all their money. So like, how are they going to like build these factories and stuff like that? It just doesn't seem a starter. So let's talk about that in relation to Britain. Let's get back to good old Blighty.